From Buffalo, Toronto Public Media, and WBFO, this is Buffalo What's Next Producer Picks. Highlights of important interviews from our program on race, education, and issues the region must face after the top shootings on May 14th. Today, Black women typically make just 67 cents for every dollar paid to white non-Hispanic men.
The pandemic and this racial reckoning have really laid bare a lot of the sort of structural and systemic inequities that are around us. And if we are not going to fix them now when they are so clear to us, when are we going to fix them?
Also ahead, homeowner education programs. Mark Overall from the Buffalo Urban League's Young Professionals. Attorney Jason Daniels on life in a white corporate world.
Being in college, as soon as you get to like junior, senior year, you just don't see many people that look like you. And then, in law school, there's not a ton. And in business school, there's even fewer.
And Karima Morris with Bury the Violent. I'm Angeli Preston. Thanks for being with us. We begin with Dave Debo and Karima Morris.
I want to go back to 2013. Karima Morris realized that there needs to be more resources spent on finding missing, runaway, and exploited and trafficked community members. So she takes the step of founding the Bury the Violence Initiative. Since then, it has expanded to work on everything from ways to memorialize homicide victims, to provide aid for their families, even fund some of their headstones. Karima, thanks so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Statistically, is there a disparity between the recovery rates of missing, runaways, or trafficked kids of color and the rest of the population?
Absolutely. There is a lack of information. Often parents don't want to share because of the way our children are viewed when they run away, as if they don't count, or they're often viewed as running away with boyfriend or a girlfriend. Yeah. So sometimes we hold back that information.
I'm picturing a scenario, though, if it's suspected to be a runaway, where the police will probably not get involved anyway. Oh, she's just a runaway. She'll show up again.
And that's the issue. Every child that runs away doesn't run because they want to. And not every child, like my niece was missing. She wasn't a runaway, but they listed her as a runaway. And
this is how why you founded the organization back in 2013. Your niece was missing. You saw a gap and said, I can help here.
So in 2013, Lanasia Rollerson is my oldest niece. She went missing, and we reached out for help. She was listed as a runaway. We told them she didn't run away. We noticed the clues and the signs. And ultimately, when you know your child, you know if they leave things behind, they didn't leave things they wanted to leave. And that's how we knew she didn't run away. Needless to say,
if she was running away, she would have packed a backpack.
Yep, she needs her snacks. Okay. She needs her smell goods and her clean underwear. None of that stuff was taken, so we knew it was a problem.
Ultimately, what was the situation?
Lanasia
was she kidnapped?
She was murdered.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. So she was said to be at a party, which was around the corner from the house. And the slack and the feedback was, where were her parents? Well, no parent sleeps in front of their door all night to keep their kids or lays in front of windows. And as children, we all did something against what our parents' beliefs were. It didn't give anyone a right to take her life. And that's exactly what they did. How
was your group, or then it was probably before the group, how were they involved? What did you do at the time?
Well, actually, it started with me and my sister looking for her. We didn't leave any stone unturned. And actually, we were getting people to tell us where she was at. We didn't know she was dead. So she was right in the backyard of the house that they said she was at. But the police told me it was a holiday and there was no detective. And this was Labor Day holiday. Since then, they have created more forces and things like that and resources available that work on holidays. With that being said, the information from the homeowner wasn't given, so they couldn't technically go in the house behind where we were told she was at, and she was actually there for 3 days.
That was going to be the next question. Between the time she was missing and the time you found the body, 3 days?
Yeah, so the police persuaded me to go for questioning or something when they actually were out there at the crime scene. They wanted me out the way. And they had the tape out. And so by the time I got out of the police station, everybody was calling and telling me that there's yellow tape right where you guys were at. And we went there, and that's where she was.
If this is painful, tell me to shut up and not ask the next question.
I'm fine. Thank you.
Outline what happened.
It was Sunday morning, which she usually would go to church with her grandmother. And my sister got up. She thought that Lenasia was at church. When everybody returned from church, it was a red flag. Where's Lenasia? So I worked at the Niagara Falls outlet. My sister called me and told me what was going on. I told her, file the police report, do whatever, I'm leaving. I'm closing the store if I have to. And I came to the city. We instantly started going in the places that we thought she could be. We started searching around everywhere within the radius of that mile. Then we started putting stuff on Facebook. We made flyers, and it just escalated. Stuff started coming in. And when I was asking for her by her name and showing her picture, the people in the community were using a different name. They were calling her 2 o'clock. So why? That's not her name. Her name is Lenasia. And then it dawned on me to ask, why are you calling her 2 o'clock? And they said, oh, that's the time we call her out. Who is we? And why are you calling her out?
Yeah.
Her house.
Okay.
And so that's the dialogue that was kind of shut off in court because they were making her out to be a prostitute and not a child who could have been trafficked by her peers and her classmates.
What has changed since then? You, as an aunt, started this effort to find her. These days, you support families who have missing kids. Do you do more now than you knew how to do back then?
Absolutely. The experience uncovered a lot that still hasn't been said, a lot about the trafficking that actually goes on in our communities, and how we need to really take time to unravel the whole ball. So that part hasn't been uncovered, but I've learned how to more strategically find them, how to use the resources that we used, like the kids and the social media. The kids talk. Rather they're bragging on something or, they're just leaving clues, the friends or the associates. So it's always important to watch your children's social media pages if they do have them.
How big of a problem is trafficking, in your opinion?
It's a catastrophe because you don't know the person next door that your child plays with. They go over there to eat. That person could be one of those in the link that's used as a house. So there was spaces where they fed kids, spaces where they partied, and these were parents, right? And so some people are comfortable with their children going to other people's houses. And these children were all linked back to her in grammar school as friends that she had grew up with.
And you use the phrase a pipeline that really kind of describes it, I guess, right? It starts out maybe with dinner at the friend's house and just slides down that pipeline?
Well, yeah. So they have sets or hangouts, things like that. And you think your child's going to a friend's, like, old school. And it's just really a hot spot for the kids to hang out while they're waiting. Because 2 o'clock in the morning, who's calling out a 12 and 13-year-old child?
In your experience, and I know there might not be hard numbers, or the hard numbers that you have might be different than the ones the police have, but in your experience, how often is a missing kid on the east side trafficked?
So I can't speak to those numbers because at the end of the day, the parents aren't comfortable with saying that, right?
Okay.
And sometimes they don't even have the awareness of why their quote unquote runaway has ran.
But you certainly believe that fewer of them are runaways than get labeled as runaways.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You think as an uncle, a grandparent, a parent, that your child just wants to leave at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning out of their nice home into the community to encounter other people and then come back home and do it the same the next day?
And I'm not trying to play the race card if it's not there to be played. But do you think that's what's going on, that the lack of police aggressiveness in chasing these cases is because these kids aren't going to be missed? They're just people of color.
Well, I can't say that. So I can say it's a lack of resources.
Okay.
I can say that we have to push, and that's why I'm in the middle. It's a lot of red tape. I'm a green tape organization. It is an urgency to me to get your child home. And so where they may have other cases and other situations, me and my team take it upon ourselves to get that information out expediently.
Karima Morris is with us. She's the executive director, founder of Bury the Violence Initiative. And as you've been hearing, she talks about working with people who have lost their kids. Sometimes that loss is, as your initial story unfolded, a homicide. You work
Yes.
with families then to ease their pain after the fact.
Yes. So it's so easy to go into a case thinking it's going to be found and returned, and that's not always the case. Even as adults, when they go missing or we're looking for them, I end up helping families after they've been murdered or they're found deceased. And so I advocate for them with the funeral homes to make sure that the DA's office has a grant where they get up to $6,000. I make sure that they get that funding positioned the right way, where the funeral home may want to give you a Cadillac, you need a Chevrolet.
Right.
Right.
And especially if the Chevy costs $6,000, but the other is $10,000.
Right.
Okay.
So we try to make sure that they have the less stress on them as possible. We advocate for them. We honor their wishes. We go back and forth between those businesses and those vendors to make sure they have everything they need within a certain amount. And so some people have nothing. And just think about it. A homicide is unexpected. And then they have children left behind. The resources that they may have need to go to those children, right? So it just spins off to so many different areas that we end up working with families because each family has a unique need after that loss.
The state has a crime victims compensation fund. Does that come into play?
So they get up to $6,000.
Oh, that's the $6,000 you spoke of.
It's
okay.
only for the funeral. It's not for the burial.
Hence your name, Bury the Violence.
Yes.
Okay.
So the burial, entails them opening and closing the plot.
Mm-hmm.
You have to buy a plot.
Right.
Okay. Then you have to have it open and closed. Then you have to think about headstones and those things. So that's a whole separate entity.
You have a separate foundation that helps with headstones and burial costs.
So it's all tied into the same thing, one name. So we would raise funds for headstones, and that way people have a way to memorialize and to decrease the street memorials. When you're going to buy a home, like those young men could tell you, when you go to buy a home and you see bears, bottles, and balloons tied to poles in front of houses, that indicates it's homicide. Yeah. If I turn a corner, that indicates this is what's going on in this neighborhood. So it decreases the property value.
And you work with communities to get rid of these makeshift memorials to find something more permanent.
So we went through the city and they have this program, and we can do memorial gardens, right? We can do rocks. There's alternative ways to have memorials without it being that way, which beautifies.
You don't want a neon sign that says, this is the site of a murder.
Not that this is the site of a murder, because people want to memorialize, but just the way that we do it, right? And so if it beautifies the neighborhood, that's great. It's okay to memorialize. I'm not saying that. So, but if you have bears that are wet and the kids come out at the bus stop, and then it's these papers that's washed off and the bottles, that's not welcoming. It's not really what I want my child to see on their way to the bus stop every day, to have that trauma. That rock may not show exactly that memorial, but we know what it is. And as they grow older, they can understand. But it's a different way to honor the life of the one that was lost.
This program obviously springs from the events on May 14th. And whenever I've talked to different guests, sometimes they talk about otherization, the idea that the top shooter was able to drive from, the accused shooter was able to drive from Binghamton and seek out a neighborhood where people had been otherized, where it didn't really matter, and he could just do what he did. Same situation here? Is there some otherization going on, do you think?
I can't say that because often it's black on black crime.
Okay.
Right? And so there's not a white person coming in our community and trafficking. Okay? So we have control over that when we get to those houses, and we know those people, and we have to have a voice in a safe space and where we could tell who's what in our neighborhood. So if we were otherized, it would be probably on a different level, not at this level.
Okay. Talk to me about the community in general, beyond maybe the work that you do with Bury the Violence. What do you think the biggest need right now is?
A sense of ownership and belonging. Often people can tear up what they don't feel like they have a part of, right? So you could tear up a house that is not yours. If you don't have a sense of ownership to that and you don't take pride in it, then what value is it to you?
Karima Morris of Bury the Violence, btvbuffalo.org. The Buffalo Information Sharing Cooperative has been working to put on financial literacy initiatives. Ayat Nieves and his brother Ahmed talked about it recently with Thomas O'Neill White.
I think experience is key. So when I do these workshops, if I'm not presenting, I choose somebody who has experience in this field, like real life experience, not just someone who read about it or who took some classes about it, but someone who's done it and done it successfully. That's what's key, is experience.
You're also quoted in the piece as saying that too many people are information hoarders. How is that a problem? How can it be solved?
The deciding factor for a lot of people is information. So a lot of people, when they get good information, they don't want other people to be competitive against them because they operate in the sense that if this person's successful, I'm going to be less successful. And I don't really operate in that sense. I believe that we could be successful all together as a community. So when I have good information, I like to share it with other people in the hopes that if they have good information, they share it back. So I believe we should all be sharing information and grow together.
Sort of like a rising tide lifts all boats theory.
Yes, exactly.
Again, you're listening to Buffalo What's Next. I'm here with Ahmad and Ayat Nieves. This wasn't quite the career you envisioned when you graduated college. What did you have in mind as a career, and what led you to create BISC?
Originally, I dreamt of either having a career in the nonprofit world or being a teacher. And after I graduated of years of working in the nonprofit world, I felt like a lot of them were ineffectual or just greatly overstated their importance in the world. And first of all, I wasn't making that much money in the nonprofit world. I was stressed out. I felt a lot of the people were insincere people, and I felt like a lot of them were perpetuating the problems that they were claiming to fix. So I got burned out in the nonprofit world. There's not really one that I've worked at that I could say is that great. And that's not a diss to them. That's just a true feeling. So the reason I created Buffalo Information Sharing Collective is because I had a vision of what I wanted to see in the world, and I wasn't seeing it in my community. So I was like, if it's not there, I'm not seeing it, I'll do it.
I want to circle back to working for nonprofits in a second. But coming from a teaching family, my brother is a teacher and my mom was a teacher. What led you away from teaching?
Oh my God. Okay, so I graduated college. I got into the school system. I started like substitute teaching and just working with these kids and seeing these kids and like all the things that they go through with their family life. It was just too much. And, you know, I know some people are going to be mad at me for saying this, but I started looking at other teachers and, you know, same age as me. And I'm like, how long have you been teaching? They're like, 3 years. And I'm like, God, I was like, this person's like 26. And, you know, she looks like she's 35. They like a lot of these teachers, they just look old and bad. And that's not an insult to them. It's just
But it takes a toll on you.
They look terrible. They do. She's like 32. She looks like she's 50.
But what I wanna since my brother is a teacher, there is an importance though that you probably recognize about having a person that looks like yourself.
Yeah.
In a position like that.
No, it's very important, and I commend the people who go out there and do it. There's some schools like I still sub to this day every now and then, and there's some schools I go in, and there'll be young African American children, and their eyes light up. They're like, oh, because they haven't
see you.
Yeah, they see
present.
me. I'm a black male. They see me. They're excited. Maybe they don't have a black male in their life, or maybe they don't see that many of them, and they're excited. And they'll come up, they'll give me a hug. They just saw me. I've even gone to some schools, and at first it was funny to me. The teacher would be like, "Hey, we got a treat today," and I'm like, "What are they talking about?" They're like, "We got a black person." I was just like, "Oh man!" But they didn't mean it with in a bad way, so I understood what they meant.
Ayat Nieves. Every year, the pay gap between white workers and black women grows larger. Jasmine Tucker is with the National Women's Law Center and got into why that is with Dave Debo.
It's not a matter of like black women choosing certain kinds of jobs. They are overrepresented in the low paid workforce, but there are other sort of things at play there, right? What we see is that there's a wage gap in 94% of occupations. Even if they're choosing a high paid job, a low paid job, like we're still seeing that black women are overrepresented. And in the pandemic, we have seen black women more likely than any other group to be on the front lines of the pandemic, continuing to provide childcare, grocery store services, like all of these essential services. And even in those jobs, we saw black women were paid less. So I think we definitely need to be doing more to hold employers accountable for that equal pay. But there are other things that I think we could do as well. Employers could sort of step back and get out of employees' way. I think right now we're seeing a lot of people resistant to go back to February 2020, where the economy really wasn't working for a lot of folks, and especially black women in these sort of underpaid and undervalued roles that they've continued to work in throughout the pandemic, providing essential services, right? And so we've seen a lot of movement on the unionizing front, and collective bargaining is a great way for workers to sort of bind together and bargain for better pay, for more benefits. Right, we're 2.5 years into the pandemic, and we still don't have guaranteed paid leave. So these workers, right, if they get sick or their kids get sick, and they need to take time out of the workforce to provide that care, and we're seeing, right, that's disproportionately falling to women. They're not able to do that and have a guaranteed job when they're no longer providing that care. So there's things that we need to do, like provide guaranteed paid leave for those folks. We need to make sure that we are investing in childcare like it's actually infrastructure. People are not able to go to work without, providing care. They can't get to work without a road to get to to their workplace. They can't go to work without a safe place for their children to go. And this wage gap means that black women are even less able than, white women or other women to afford that care because their wages are lower. This is a really tricky one because we're simultaneously asking, parents to pay an arm and a leg for the care and underpaying, the very female-dominated childcare workforce. So this is sort of a myth.
You're looking for some policy changes in addition to, forgive me for putting it this way, for poking or badgering the employers?
Yes. I think that we're going to need some policies, some laws in place that's going to hold those employers accountable, and they will have if they are breaking the law and not paying employees equally, then there's some course of action. There's legal action that folks can take, and that often does mean something to employers. They don't want to lose, all of the legal fees and whatnot that they would have to pay. They want to be compliant with the law. So I do think that would go a long way to help.
You've just brought up the next thing I was going to ask you about, and this is really more for discussion than it is me just being naive. But isn't there a law against this sort of thing? You said earlier that among full-time year-round workers, black women typically make 67 cents for every dollar paid to white non-Hispanic men. Isn't that illegal? Aren't there anti-discrimination laws? I guess what I'm asking, and this is maybe where the naivete comes in, if these laws are on the books, why does this situation still exist?
Right. I think so. What we do need is like an equal pay law that is like at the federal level. There's lots of states that have equal pay laws like this, but not every state. Right. We need something like the Paycheck Fairness Act, which is going to sort of be the law of the federal land and ensure that there will be less of this. I think there will always be a little bit, of this happening, and I think employers will explain away some of the issues or discrepancies that we see in some way. And I think, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still try to put something in place that will close this gap, right? I mean, 67 cents is not enough. And there's a lot that we can do to get it closer to parity, and we have to do it.
And is it a matter, as you mentioned earlier, of just litigate?
Well, like I said, I think we need this multi-pronged approach. I think we've talked a little bit about companies or employers doing stuff. I think in 2020 there was a lot, right? There was this sort of racial reckoning where I think some folks who had never sort of faced it before sort of realized their role, and a lot of employers, right, were doing some performing on their social media platforms and other platforms and saying, Black Lives Matter. And that was important to do. But I think what we really needed them to do was to look at how they're paying their workers and seeing if there are disparities by race, by gender, in the same roles. We needed to see Black workers and Black women in particular put in management roles, put in positions, C-suite positions that are not just diversity, equity, and inclusion positions, right? We need to see those employers put their money where their mouth is, right? And create workplaces that are being led by Black women. So, right, if white men continue to sort of be in the C-suite and to manage these workplaces, they're never going to be friendly enough for women and for women of color who are bearing the brunt of this pandemic and who are more likely to be breadwinners than white women. The workplace is never going to work for them. And so we need to put Black women in positions of power within these organizations so that they can bring about some change that is so desperately needed for those who are not in the C-suite.
I had never thought of it until you mentioned it, but Black Lives Matter penetrated society. It was something that I think the George Floyd knee on the neck was in everyone's living room. They couldn't avoid it. But at the same time, its focus was primarily police brutality. It didn't necessarily spark a broader discussion on all the other equity issues, this one included.
Right. And, the defund the police is definitely a big piece of the puzzle here, right? We are policing Black folks at a disproportionate rate, and that takes away, income from Black families. That takes away income for those communities. We're losing so much by doing this policing and by not addressing mental health issues or other issues, right? People are in poverty, right? Like these are social issues that we need to be fixing by investing in people and not in the police and policing them. But you're hitting sort of the nail on the head there, is that there are tons of ways that we can do this, and right, centering Black women in this recovery. I feel like the pandemic and this racial reckoning have really laid bare a lot of the sort of structural and systemic inequities that we have in the economy, that we have in the workplace, that we have in all of these systems that are around us. And if we are not going to fix them now when they are so clear to us, when are we going to fix them?
Jasmine Tucker is Research Director at the National Women's Law Center. This is Buffalo What's Next, highlights of WBFO's weekday discussion on race, equality, and our shared humanity. Two recent issues that really feed off of each other, touching on the same topic of sometimes how alone you can feel being Black in the corporate world. First, attorney Jason Daniels with J. Moran.
Being in college, as soon as you get to like junior, senior year, you just don't see many people that look like you. And then, in law school, there's not a ton. And in business school, there's even fewer. So it's like you kind of start to get the idea of, if these are the schools that feed these kind of jobs, that there's not a lot of people like me doing these kind of jobs. So it's like you just start to prepare yourself mentally. And, you start to realize this is what this looks like.
Can you take us through that a little bit? Like you said, prepare yourself mentally. I mean, that's easier said than done. I wake up every morning trying to prepare myself mentally for things, and I look back at the end of the day, and whatever I prepared for didn't come to fruition, and I didn't change. But what about for you? How did you, like you said, prepare for those challenges that were ahead that you knew were going to be coming?
Yeah, you just look at it. I mean, for me, kind of growing up, I didn't, I wanted to be a lawyer because I saw it on TV. Like I watched a lot of court TV and it became interesting to me. But like, coming up, I didn't know any lawyers or really have any experience and everything. It was just kind of, what I had seen. And, when I got to college, there were people, and you could just tell, there were people who, had parents who were lawyers and, had different people who were in different professions, and they had some of that guidance. And myself, I kind of just, figured it out on my own. And, I found good mentors, as I got further on and I got into law school and stuff. But early on, it was like, just trying to navigate and to try to figure out, what this looks like. So
you had no specific role model, so to speak, as you were making your way along this journey?
Not really. Yeah, it was just kind of like, this is what I want to do. I think I could be good at it. These people seem to do well financially. That was a goal of mine. And, I just kind of pushed forward. And, really as I got older and as I, got more school behind me and everything, I started to really get a better idea of, okay, this is good. And like, this person, this person looks like somebody who, I should talk to or do something with and everything. But a lot of it really came organically.
What makes a good lawyer? What makes a good somebody who does your kind of work?
So there's differences, right? So there are some lawyers who are trial lawyers, and there's courtroom lawyers, and there's a specific skill set to do that. For me, kind of being more of an in-house corporate guy, it's really about people skills, and it's about relationship building, and it's about being able to relate to all kinds of different people and, have conversations and build trust.
Let's go through your journey just a little bit, if we could, and talk about some of the things that you experienced. Obviously, we hear about it on so many levels of society about the difficulty it can be for people of color in lots of things, especially in a community like Buffalo that has a high level of segregation. What about your journey along the way? What can you share with us that wasn't necessarily all that easy?
Yeah, so some things like I remember first becoming a lawyer, and I would go into meetings with my paralegal, who was an older white woman, and everybody would assume she was a lawyer, and I was just, and that went on for like a month or so, and then people kind of start to get to know you and everything. But you have other situations, like I had a situation, this was some years ago, where we had a meeting. I forgot what the meeting was about, but after the meeting, I was having a conversation with another employee about a football game or something like that, and a more senior lawyer who was an older white woman pulled me to the side afterwards and told me that I didn't speak in a way that, she felt represented the organization well. And for me, that was one of like the first kind of moments where that kind of happened directly. So it kind of set me back a little bit. But then, you have to kind of, take inventory of the situation, right? Like I'm, a young black man and I'm in this department where, our boss was a white woman and there's all these other, everybody in the department's either a white woman or, an Irish man. And, if I, get into it with this woman or something like that, is it worth it? And
Sure.
and how's it going to go for me? And, sometimes you run into those situations where people say things that are off-putting. Like, for example, I wear earrings. And early in my practice, people would, call it out or say something and everything. And it's just like, you kind of have to laugh some stuff off that maybe you don't necessarily think is funny.
Yeah. Just curious, back to that conversation about football. You said that, but what specifically was it? Just the way, just a couple of guys talking about a game and just the way the passion of it all?
I have no idea. But,
Really?
we were just talking about the game and talking about some players and stuff like that and everything. And I forgot exactly what the conversation was. But, evidently she didn't like the way I said something or something I said. We certainly, weren't using any profanity or anything like that. But it was just, that was a person who, she came from another law firm where it also, I don't think they ever had any employees of color or anything like that. And she came in and she was a little older and you could tell like she was a little older school about things. And, she just had, weird ways. But for me, it was offsetting because, at that time I was a person, I'd been a lawyer for some time for, at least a few years and, went through law school and went through business school. And I'd been, involved in all kinds of meetings and everything. And nobody had ever told me, the way you speak isn't proper for this organization. So it was like.
Yeah. What about expectations? As you were talking about that, I was thinking, when a man of color walks into a room, a professional room, or wherever, it doesn't have to be there, it could be. But what about that? Do you have a sense of people's expectations? They see you in there, then all of a sudden they may expect you to be something that you are not. Do you ever get that kind of a reaction?
Not so much, especially early on. I would get like, it would seem like people were surprised.
Okay.
I was there because I was, a pretty young guy and everything, but that would happen a little bit. I don't necessarily know about expectations. I know for myself, my expectations of myself, I have a lot of, white friends who are lawyers and, we talk about like career and expectations and stuff like that and everything. And I always feel like they're a little more at ease than me. Like, for me, I'm not necessarily uptight. Like, I've been doing my job for a while. I feel like I'm really good at it. But, there's always kind of this, I think some people call it imposter syndrome, where it's like, you feel like, this could end any time or like something could happen. And you just, you feel like you have to be more careful than I feel like other people do.
Okay.
And, sometimes it's a little limiting because, you'll see an opportunity or something like that and everything. You'll have to, kind of dial it back in your head. While I feel like other people just feel like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. So this is supposed to happen.
Wow. But yet you've been able to deal with that. Can you take us through how you, again, go about dealing with that sense that that maybe you can't proceed quite as aggressively or as naturally as maybe other people can?
Yeah. I think at this point, I've been at it for long enough where
it's just part of who you are.
Yeah. And it's just kind of a what happens things. I operate under proceed until apprehended at this point. So it's like, I just keep going further and I do the best work that I can do. And, I try to surround myself with people who I know are good people. Like, right now, I'm in a situation at Catholic Health where my boss is a really good friend of mine, and our CEO is a really good guy. And there's a lot of people who I know support me and support what we're doing. And I always like, when I'm looking at opportunities and when I'm figuring out what I'm going to do next, that's really important to me. Like, I always identify, I'm like, I need to have a boss who's a person that I connect with, who's a person that I like and I know is going to support me. So I feel comfortable, being me and proceeding and everything because, you hear horror stories about people who end up in really bad situations. Sure. And I'm just like, I've gotten to the point where, my kind of peace of mind is more important than making a little more money and being in a different position. So I've just gotten to the point where, it's really first it's about like the people and then it's about, okay, this is the job that I like and everything.
Proceed until apprehended. I'm going to take that and steal that from you. That is a memorable phrase right there for sure. Jason Daniels is our guest here on Buffalo What's Next. He's the senior legal counsel at Catholic Health. People use the term microaggressions when it comes to dealing with racial issues and such. What about for you? When you hear that term microaggressions, what do you think about?
Oh, it happens all the time.
Really?
And the thing is, so, it's not all intentional. Sometimes it's just, somebody who's never spoke never spoken to somebody who looks like you before, or, isn't comfortable and things like that. And I think, at least the way I operate is, I try to create a safe space for people to, I don't take myself super seriously. So, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and it's not somebody that I'm familiar with, I just try to make them understand that, it's a safe space. So, if you say something that's not, that's not something that's proper or something like that and everything, like I'll tell you about it, but it's always in a friendly way. And very seldom is there, very seldom professionally at least, is there something malicious.
Sure.
There's been a couple small situations where there've been things that I felt was malicious, but most of the time it's just, misunderstandings. And I think there's two ways you can handle it. I've seen people take those little small misunderstandings and make huge ordeals out of them and really blow things out of proportion. But, the other way, which I think is the better way, to really just use those as teachable moments and, educate and talk through things and, build relationships in that way, because ultimately once you take it out of proportion, people go back into their, back kind of into their shells and you don't get anywhere.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach to it, and you would probably know well enough that not everybody would take it quite that way.
Oh,
right,
not at
right?
all.
Yeah,
and I think especially with what you've seen over the last couple of years, with really there's been a really big push in things like DE&I, and after George Floyd and just a lot of what's going on, you see like a really big push, and people are getting kind of really aggressive right away. And that's just not an approach that works with everyone. I mean, you got to think about it. A lot of these people, right or wrong, they've operated in a professional environment where there's only been people that have looked like them in certain spaces for, 30, 40, 50 years. So to expect that because this one thing happened, everybody's going to automatically change tomorrow, it's not appropriate, and it's not reasonable. So, obviously people who have certain beliefs that are inappropriate, they have to change things, and they have to, really think about, who they are or what they're presenting, especially in the workplace. But I think you kind of have to meet people where they're at a little bit and like bring them along. Interesting
about microaggressions. You've nodded very quickly at the affirmative that you understand it. If you wouldn't mind sharing what when it comes to microaggressions, if you mind sharing maybe a couple of examples, because I think we have a lot of people who, since May 14th especially, want to make a difference. They want to make a difference. They want to make a difference in how they deal with people and how they can help this community move forward. What about some of those things that you've experienced?
I think the low-hanging fruit one that happens all the time is when they introduce people of color to leadership positions, they immediately say, how well they speak, or, they present themselves really well, or it's like compliments, but they're not compliments that they give to, every other, white man or woman that's ever been in that role. And I see that all the time. And that's like one thing that I immediately call out. I'm like, well, have we ever done it? Like, do we do this in other, like, why do we feel the need to say that this, master's educated person speaks well? Obviously they speak well, right? Like, those kind of things, a lot of the things, especially when dealing with women of color, the hair, there's like, just comments like that, and not necessarily malicious comments, but like, assuming because, black woman has straight hair that she's Indian or something like that, or just assuming that every black man over 6 feet plays basketball, like just things like that, or listens to rap music, or just things like that I think come from a good place and maybe come from uncomfortability, but it's not necessarily the kind of comment that you would make towards a person of a different color or background.
What advice would you have to a white person just wants to go about doing things the right way, but they're older or whatever, they've lived in, like you said, mainly places of non-color throughout their days? Well,
I'd like to say, first and foremost, the fact that they're thinking that way is like a big step in the right direction, right? Because there are a ton of people who couldn't care less about this and, really have no interest in changing the way they think or anything like that. So, the fact that a person's forward thinking and like, has those thoughts in the first place is really good to begin with. One of my really close friends, who was my original boss from a couple jobs ago and a great mentor of mine, her and I are really good friends. We, hang out, have dinner and stuff like that and everything. And, she's a 64-year-old white woman and I'm, a young guy. And, one thing that we connected on is she was just always really forward thinking. And she understood that she grew up in a time long before where things were different, but she was really open-minded and really kind of willing to accept that, things have changed and understand that. And I think just kind of, keeping your ears open and understanding things. And then also just trying to, when people give you feedback, not necessarily taking offense to it, especially if the feedback is respectfully given, but also just kind of thinking about, purposefully thinking about the things you say and why you're saying them, right? Like, when you're writing an introduction for a new employee who's a person of color, right? Look at the introductions you've written for employees before, and if there's a big difference, why is that? Why am I saying this and I didn't say this before? And it takes work, because those aren't things that we naturally do, because I think we all come kind of hardwired with stereotypes and assumptions and things like that. Like, there's times where I'll look at a person and I'll assume something because of the way they look or how they are, and that assumption isn't correct at all. One thing I think about all the time, like, kind of being a younger guy, on the weekends you go into work to pick up papers or something like that, and you're dressed in whatever you wear on the weekend. And the thing about being a lawyer, it's like when you're in a suit or you're dressed up and everything, people look at you a certain way.
Right.
But when you're in sweats and stuff, it's like it's different. And I've had some interesting interactions with security and with different people and stuff, just kind of off hours, coming up to the office to pick stuff up, and those aren't the same kind of interactions that my white counterparts have had. So it's just kind of getting through some of those things also. Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting. And what about maybe on a broader perspective? And obviously, you're only really familiar when it comes to your particular organization and your efforts, but overall, what you're seeing in the workplace landscape when it comes to diversity and inclusion, what's your sense?
Yeah, so I see three different kinds of organizations, right? There's organizations who aren't doing anything at all, and it's just not a part of it. I see organizations who have like one employee, right? They pick said black person, make them chief diversity officer, and throw them into the pool. And many times that person's like the only person of color in their leadership team. And it's like, go do stuff, right? And that generally doesn't work. And then there's other organizations that, ours is definitely less mature in that area, but you see like M&T, they have, a really good program, and, Glenn Jackson over there, he's really good, and they do a lot of stuff and get a lot of people involved. But organizations that really try to engage lots of different people from different places in the organization and really kind of make it more of a team effort than a one person pushing it, or than we're not doing anything at all, our culture's fine. So, those are the three different things that I see. And, I think it's more of a Buffalo thing, because, I have friends that live down in Atlanta, live in D.C., live in different places, and they are light years ahead of us to some extent. There are some organizations in those places too who are also like, we don't care about that either. So, you get, it's a mixed bunch.
It's interesting you bring up Atlanta. We had a conversation a while ago with Madison Carter, who was here for some time as a reporter, and she moved to Atlanta. And one of the conversations I brought up is, talk about the differences with Atlanta and Buffalo, and she reflected a lot of what you just mentioned there. But I'm curious, for a guy like you, you're a professional. You're obviously moved ahead in your field very quickly. Is there an attraction to go to a place like Atlanta or Washington?
For me,
yeah.
No, because I'm a Buffalo guy.
Good.
And like I love Buffalo, and it's just, it's just where I am. But the one thing, I'll say, I have relatives that live in Atlanta and everything. And the one thing that, that really, really, really is great in those places that we don't have here is you go to those cities and you see neighborhoods, affluent, Black and, Hispanic, and like you just see full neighborhoods with people of color, right? And they're affluent and they're nice neighborhoods. And it's almost surprising because, being from Buffalo, if you go to a nice neighborhood, it's a mostly white neighborhood. I live in Williamsville, and, Williamsville, you don't really have many Black neighbors, right? It's just how it is. So to go other places and to be like in nice areas and to see lots of people that look like you, it's like, wow, like this is great. But for me, the thought process is always, I would love to have this in Buffalo, not necessarily I want to come here for this.
That's Jason Daniels, a corporate attorney with Catholic Health. And now, Dave Debo continues a similar discussion with Mark Overall from the Buffalo Urban League's Young Professionals.
Part of the segment that Jay just had on before us was looking at how Black people navigate positions of power in a corporate world that is oftentimes dominated more by whites. Does the Urban Professionals Group address that? Or?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the main benefits to a group like YP, which we call Young Professionals for short, is oftentimes it creates that after work space for majority Black and brown professionals. Yes, I mean, but a lot of people are either one of the, a very select group, a small group of minorities in their workspace. So yeah, so kind of navigating those spaces is actually one of the more common talking points.
How large is the problem or the disparity, the difference?
I mean, it varies. I mean, a lot of young professionals do work in the nonprofit space, so in that area, it's a little.
And that's an area that I imagine isn't quite as much of, if we dare say, an offender as the corporate world.
As the corporate world, but in the corporate world, when you're thinking about banks, when you're thinking about, large conglomerates, it can get the numbers can be pretty low when it comes to Black and brown representation.
What's the spin-off effect of that? If the numbers are low, what problem does that then create in the community?
Oftentimes focus on outreach, oftentimes approaches. Sometimes perfect example, when a tragedy happens like May 14th.
Sure.
Oftentimes there are companies and organizations that want to give to support, which is great. I mean, but oftentimes the people that they're either giving to or the people that are executing the support in a neighborhood like, the Jefferson Fruit Belt area don't look like the residents. And so things like that would be often mitigated or even eliminated by having more representation at the table when it comes to planning, saying, hey, you know what, if we're going to send people into this neighborhood, we're going to deploy people into this neighborhood, let's let those people look like the people that they're serving.
We've had mental health counselors on this program say that for them that has certainly been an issue.
It is.
That there just aren't enough practitioners of color for people to feel comfortable talking about really sensitive issues with someone who doesn't look like them.
Absolutely.
I also imagine it is an issue. They raised it this weekend. There was a summit this weekend on Saturday.
Yes.
Where they talked quite a bit about the idea that plans are good, progress is good. 4 months after the shooting, we have to do something. But darn it all, those plans, they said, have to come from people of color. That too often they're, I don't want to say imposed, but too often maybe they're brought to the table by others.
I would agree.
Okay.
I think oftentimes, and you can look throughout history, but if I don't want to get too contentious, but
right.
I will say if you look throughout history, I think it's always going to be problematic if you have a group saying, "Hey, we're from the outside, but we think
this is what you should do.
These are your problems, and this is how you should solve them." Right? And I think that'll be a little off-putting to any group of people.
Historically, is that a scenario that occurs more with people of color, do you think?
Well, yes. I mean, it's with the Native Americans, with the Africans, with Black people in America, with I mean, Hispanic people. I mean, yes, it's been constantly a thing. So we try to. One thing I like about the Urban League is that we're not separatists when it comes to who our allies are. We like to form bonds and allyship with everyone. However, when it comes to the execution of how help and change should be implemented, we need to be at the forefront, and we ask to be at the forefront because we know the needs of our community. That's why, shout out to Thomas Buford and the Urban League staff for putting that resource center right at Jefferson and Glenwood, saying, hey, we're going to deploy these resources here because we know that this is ground zero and we know that this is a community that needs those extra services. And let me just say one more thing. YP was one of the groups that served as greeters at Johnny B. Wiley because people were coming in for the free mental health consultations.
Right, the day after.
The whole 2 weeks after. But the point is, the clinicians didn't look like the residents. So they wanted YPs and other organizations like that to say, hey, welcome, we're glad you're here. While you're waiting, is there anything we can do for you because we look like the residents?
Yeah. Mark Overall is here. He's president of the Buffalo Urban League's Young Professionals Group. You just mentioned Thomas Buford. He's president of the Urban League. We've had him here on the program before. But for folks that didn't necessarily hear that program or don't want to go on and hunt it down online, give me the very quickest of recaps. What is the Urban League?
So the Urban League, let me just say it, the National Urban League was started in, I think, 1910, right?
Yeah,
and and Buffalo chapter is an affiliate of it. And it was founded for two main reasons. The Great Migration, people moving from the South to the North and the Midwest and the West. And those people often coming from rural areas, farmers, sharecroppers, things like that, they needed jobs and housing. They were relocating from, rural Alabama, rural Georgia, rural Mississippi, moving to urban cities like Buffalo, New York City is where the headquarters is, places like that, Chicago, D.C. And it's okay, now they're in urban areas, hence the Urban League, and they need, a place to live, and they need places to work. So when the organization was founded saying, hey, these are people overall, not everyone, of course, that coming from, blue collar farming backgrounds, they need to be trained on different areas of vocation. So it was founded to train them. So, and then Buffalo chapter came in the 1920s. We're coming up on 90 years. Our anniversary is coming up. So, and that's it, but it has since evolved past just housing and jobs to entrepreneurship, to first-time home ownership, to adoption and foster care, to basically trying to. I always nutshell it as saying the Urban League exists to give every person, regardless of their color, access to the American dream. And that is, a job that pays a decent wage, to live in a good neighborhood, to raise your kids in a good area, and to go to good schools.
Oh, you just opened up the box, though. Is there generally a lack of access? And I'm asking it somewhat rhetorically, because I think I know the answer. But tell me to what extent, or there is a lack of access to the American dream. So
when you look at it, and again, not trying to be too contentious, but I can talk about this all day. Oh, come on,
we like contentious. It's okay.
Okay, so when it comes to access, I think Cornel West said it best. He said, oftentimes America, the largest society, will say that, says, hey, you can be great, you can be this, you can be that. But the overwhelming majority of people are, have less than $100 a month after they pay their expenses. They're, a lot of people live from check to check. Their kids are in bad schools, and they put up these celebrities like Barack Obama and LeBron James and say, and we want the vast majority and the black masses to live vicariously through these few celebrities. And so when you look at it as, yes, do we have more black faces in high places? Yes, we do. But like Dr. West said, but yes, if you take every black face in a high place, he has 100 cousins on both sides of his family that live below the poverty line. So that's why when you think about the access, you think about is success widespread or is it very selective and limited? And I think that the answer overwhelmingly is the latter.
That's Mark Overall. From Buffalo Toronto Public Media, this has been Buffalo What's Next Producer Picks. Longer versions of all these interviews come to you each weekday on WBFO each morning at 10 with a replay each night at 9. The program is also available by subscription from wherever you get your podcasts, and every episode is on demand at WBFO.org. I'm Angeli Preston. Thanks for listening.